soon too.
Great. So that one's recording, that one's recording. We'll just...
There we go, multiple recordings.
Yeah, and then I can zoom in on
and
this
you
one.
And you can catch different angles, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting setup you got going there. So you want to do a quick little intro, then I'll hold the book up and talk a bit.
You want me to do the intro? What do you want me to say?
Yeah, just say we're here at the Crystal Dome Retreat with Joseph Mark Cohen, and we're going to tonight. We're going to be the interview is going to be about his recent novel publication.
Okay. I could also add that in before with another video clip.
Okay.
That could be done too, so that it's more formal.
Okay.
But I could just say, we're here at the Dome, the Crystal Dome Retreat with Joseph Mark Cohen, who's going to introduce his new book.
Okay. And then I'll talk a little bit, and then you'll start with the question list. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
And I'll just have it in my hands.
Okay. You good to go?
Ready to go.
Okay, we're here at the Crystal Dome Retreat with Joseph Mark Cohen, who's going to introduce his new book, The Unicorn Messiah.
Here it is, Dan.
Yeah, I'll zoom in on that.
That's the cover. The cover of the book was a bit of a work in and of itself, if you remember. And it has a painting by a local artist named Karen Joulot on the cover. And we call it a mythic memoir of shamanic Kabbalah. And I should explain that the Hebrew word shaman means oil. So, as King David and all of the people that were anointed, it talks about the crown chakra being anointed, spirit anointing you. So in the Hebrew word, shaman is the root for shamanic, even though shamanic probably came from the far west of Russia now, something like that.
So how long have you been working on your book?
I think the question is, how long has the book been working on me? It's a challenging question. It goes like this. When I was in my 20s, my wife, myself, my daughter, and a few friends, we all went to Israel being with this teacher that is named Johanna in the book. And she was Dutch, had a great sense of humor, but she was brilliant. And she had been introduced to the work of Carlos Suarez, who put out a couple of books on Kabbalah. And a friend of mine sponsored Suarez once in California. And he brought the Kabbalah of the artist forth, because there was a school of Kabbalah in Alexandria in the 20s, 30s, 40s of the most recent century. And he brought through a teaching on the Hebrew alphabet, where the Hebrew alphabet, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet become like vibrational codes, quantum physics. And that's a different form of Kabbalah than the teachings on the Tree of Life. And it's a different form of Kabbalah teaching about the angels and interdimensional beings. So there's so many aspects to the Kabbalah that are schools in and of themselves. Drunvalo took a little bit of Kabbalah and brought that forth as well at some point, because he was involved in the Sufi work, and the Sufi work and Kabbalah work kind of close. So anyways, that was a good year of my life, being with this teacher. And the writing of the book it's not a written book, it's a spoken book. Mm-hmm. So for a few years, I had to just hide it away in my psyche and digest the experience in my 20s. And it wasn't until my 30s that I realized that I owed a debt to my teacher and the teachings that I was given, and needed to find a way to make it more available. So I have other books on Kabbalah that students have worked with, and ebooks on, there's 3 different ones that I have. But I felt like that's a very specialized audience, and I wanted something that really could touch the heart and soul of people. So I felt that adventure travel, of which I've done a lot, because I like exploring sacred sites, was the way to go with it. So the novel takes people to Greece, Egypt, Israel, and a few other places, Cyprus. And that way people can hitchhike with a spiritual group.
So would you call this your life's masterpiece, your life's work, or an assembly of a lot of things that you've learned about?
You probably don't know until you leave your body what your masterpiece was when it comes right down. But I would certainly say I put more energy and more attention to this because I felt it's not as specialized as a treatise on Kabbalah. It allows people to hitchhike and meet different teachers. I mean, there's a chapter 8 about the teacher named Daskalos, who was a great Greek teacher that I met in New York City once at a seminar. And there's other teachers in the book from the time that I was in Israel who taught different aspects of Kabbalah than my teacher did. And there was a Gurdjieff Uspensky teacher who was my neighbor up in Rosh Pinah. And I heard recently that Rosh Pinah has become quite a cult center again up in the north in Israel, and even Madonna has bought, $1 million home up there. So I hope that she has a chance to read my novel and learn about Rosh Pinah in 1975.
So another question would be, your chapters in your book, why did you choose the number of chapters that you chose? Is there some kind of numerology involved in the choosing of your chapters?
There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
Okay.
So in a certain sense, each chapter is resonant with a Hebrew letter. And I'll have fun with that because the first 36 people, and they're almost a group now, the first 36 to have the book, will be invited to a webinar. And I will share how to read the book to learn about the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
And the other thing I was wondering about is, why did you choose 72 main characters?
Well, 72 is kind of a magic, mystical number for both Kabbalah and astrology. In Kabbalah, it's the Hebrew word chesed, which is compassion. But it's also a way, when you take the Hebrew divine name, which is composed of 4 letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, and you add it up in a particular way, it becomes 72 as well. So 72, and then astrologically, when I do Kabbalistic astrology, every 72 years we have a shift in the energy that comes into the planet. So it represents a degree of zodiacal space, one could say. So, and it's a fifth of a circle. I mean, here we are in a geodesic dome, and you're looking at pentagons and hexagons, which are division of the circle by 5 and division of the circle by 6, and in the Hebrew divine name is 5, 6, 5, 6, like that.
I'm aware that the number 72 also connects with the precessional cycle.
Absolutely. Every 72 years we have a shift in a degree of the precession. So it's an important one. And it was easy because, there's more than 72 characters in the book, really, but I chose 6 for each sign of the zodiac and felt that my astrological community would be interested in the, what we could call astrological humor that I've nested into the characters, 6 for each of the sun signs.
So there's a lot of hidden messages and code and intelligence and numerology in the book. Did you intentionally put a lot of that in there?
Absolutely intentional, and sometimes even they happened when I wasn't intending. It was just, spirit throwing them in, like cosmic humor.
A bit of channeling.
Yeah, there's a bit of channeling in there. And I would have to say that the main character, Johanna, was an extraordinarily gifted channel. And I learned later from a man who I believe is still alive in Australia named Edmund Harold, who was a channel that sent me to Egypt the very first time I went. And I made an encore, and within 6 months I was taking 4 people to Egypt. So what was your question again, man?
Well, that actually is leading me to another question now.
Okay.
And that is, would you call this true or false, or would this be fiction or nonfiction?
It's a combination. You have to understand that I think the best of fiction writers, and my favorite was Lawrence Durrell, would take characters that he knew in Alexandria for the Alexandrian Quartet, and you use the archetype of the character, and you use what you can find that's humorous, but you need a base somewhere. You don't just pull your characters out of thin air. So in the very back of the book, I confess that many of these characters were built on my memory of people that I knew many years ago. And in a certain sense, I wanted to wait a long time. You don't want to be sued. So you want to wait a long time so that, somebody's, a ripe old fig later on in life and say, hey, look at it, he did it, he put me in the mall.
So there was a lot of perfect timing in the book being finished at this point.
Yeah, and I had no idea it was going to take so long. But the truth is, I had to wait for scribes that I could work with. And even the scribes had to come to my home sometimes. So it wasn't, it was a slow motion item from beginning to end. And it took me like 6-7 years before I really committed, until I had this chat with Edmund Harold, that I really realized that I had to write this book. Or bring it through is a better way of saying it, I guess.
So who do you think your target audience would be? And I recognize this book and I read it, and I notice it's very thick. You almost have to be in a certain state of mind to let it sink in. You can't be in your rational mind all the time when you're reading this book. It sinks in a very subtle way. So a lot of people, when they first look at this book, they'll be like, what is this? And they may not understand it. So on that note, who do you think your target audience would be?
Well, it's multidimensional in the sense that there's a few different groups. For sure, those people interested in adventure travel. And that chapter on Egypt I'm going to keep available online for free, so that people can read that chapter on Egypt, because I have done a lot of Egypt tours and I want people to benefit from that. But the audience can be anybody interested in Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, anybody interested in astrology. And you asked about the 22 before. There's a certain resonance with the chapters with the archetypes of the tarot trump, which my understanding is that they were connected to the Hebrew alphabet in the beginning. So there's a bit of gypsy energy that comes out of Saqqara in Egypt, and I put some of that in a hidden way in the novel as well. So one of the seminal books for me was The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. I probably read the whole book and took notes, and this, was very important to me. So in a certain sense, this is my Secret Teachings of All Ages book, but in adventure travel with a lot of humor.
That's great.
Like that.
That's great. And there's a lot of pictures in your book. And so why did you choose all of the pictures?
Well, the pictures, some of them were very connected to personal memory of times and places. But many of them are just beautiful, colorful art that conveys something. And people think that Kabbalah is totally and completely a science of number mysticism and this and that. But it's the Kabbalists who've been artists, painters and poets that have had a much better connection with an audience, because then they're transmitting kind of a hidden music or a vibrational state. through their work.
So it's not a purely logical language. It has male and female aspects to
Absolutely.
it. It's holographic.
Absolutely. And there's a whole aspect of Kabbalah which is about lucid dreaming. And I believe that Drumbulo married a woman who had studied with a teacher that I knew in Jerusalem named Colette Muscat. And so I learned some of that work too. And I have a friend who's on the back jacket who's a Jungian analyst, and she understands, because she's traveled to Egypt and Israel a lot, and she understands what I'm doing with this book. And it even begins with a lucid dream about a man who may have been a teacher of mine in a past life named Abraham Abulafia, who was a great Kabbalist, a real wild one, who was connected to the Sufis as well.
Now, as far as novels go, would you say that your novel runs in a linear timeline, or does it have aspects to it that are non-linear as far as the beginning and the end? Is there some type of switcheroo
Tell me
there?
a little bit more what you mean by
Well, most novels follow a linear timeline. There's a normal plot that novelists would find, a mold.
Yeah.
Now, I know this about your book, that it's not, you're not linear in that way, are you? So in other words, how would you say your book flows?
Well, it is linear in the sense that it starts with a meeting of a teacher, and there's a certain months until the book reaches its end. Year and a half, whatever. But it's multidimensional in that when you go into a particular culture, particularly in the Mediterranean world, that is so rich, as soon as you're in Greece or Egypt or Israel or Cyprus, I didn't put Malta in the book, but I could have, you're in a lineage of spiritual teaching that you can find through the archaeology and the sacred sites in those zones, like that. So for me, it was important to bring through teachings of some other teachers in the book. So there was a teacher that I had in the island of Hydra, and there's a whole chapter, 7, that takes place on the island of Hydra, which in the 70s and 80s was an artist's retreat zone. No cars, and that's where Leonard Cohen chose to live for quite some period of time. So the Mediterranean world is probably my home world. How I came to be living as a hermit in the woods of British Columbia is beyond me. But it's not a bad place to write and play piano.
So in what parts of the world does the book take place? If you were to name different regions, what would be the most influential regions where the book takes place, the setting?
Well, for sure, northern Israel and Rosh Pinah, which was the latter part of the book. Jerusalem has its own chapter, chapter 10, where I'm working with the wisdom of some of the shopkeepers there. And Cyprus, I didn't go into the earth energy of Cyprus too much. I just, went to study and spend some time with a teacher named Daspalos in one of the chapters. It's chapter 8. And then before that, there's Hydra in Greece, where there was one of my Kabbalah teachers. So it stays pretty much in the Mediterranean world, though it does begin in Canada, of course, in Vancouver, and there's a few episodes that take place on the Toronto Island, where I lived in the 70s. So it hops around.
So you said that a lot of this book was kind of like coming through you you hadn't written anything down yet. It was sort of like regurgitating in the back of your mind. And how did you start writing this book? Did you write it in pen, or did you type it on a typewriter?
No, none of the above there, Dan. This was verbally channeled, and I had the wonderful grace of having 3 or 4 different scribes who would come to me, and I would tell it like a bedtime story for, a 5 to 10-year-old, though the scribes were much older than that. And I needed that level to keep it more imaginal, more humorous, and not get too bogged down in the correct detail of memory. So it moves back and forth between, how shall we say it, a multi-dimensional memory that often jumps off into a visionary perspective. It's like if you're a filmmaker, you want to do interviews and close-ups, but you want to have long pan shots and you want to feel the energy of arrival to a scene. So, look, it would be my absolute delight if a filmmaker would pick up this novel and say, we can make it. It's an expensive film to make, I'm sure.
So I would like you to find a part of the book, if you want, and just read a chapter or even...
an episode.
Not a chapter, but maybe some little part of the book.
So you want to give me a number? What?
Okay, how about 12? I'll just give you number 12 and see where that lands with you.
Okay, why not? Just a sample, eh?
Yeah, just to sample one of your favorite pieces.
12 is going on in Jerusalem. And it's taking place, it's eventually taking people to a Passover Seder at Mount Sinai. And what's popped out is 12:4. And I don't know if I'll read all of it, but it's short. Here goes. It's called The Soiree at Beit Kilim. Mark went on a personal silence retreat for 2 or 3 days after his visit to the Temple Mount. Jared was sparse during that time, claiming he needed to interview a few new shopkeepers for an article he was considering writing on the people of the Shuk. Sarah didn't want to hear a word about his visit to the Dome of the Rock. Mark felt like the hanged man. Now consider that the hanged man is the 12th card of the tarot, and I actually did put a tarot card in bold in each of the episodes for those people that enjoyed the tarot. From the tarot, finding himself hung between a rock and a hard place, as Johanna used to say, he went 3 mornings in a row, very early to the wall, in an attempt to balance, inside his own soul, the 3 world religions that share Jerusalem. Even at the deepest place of prayer, with his favorite Yemenite Chavara at the wall, he could still hear the chant of the muezzin broadcasting from the loudspeaker at the mosque high above. He liked to walk through both the Armenian and the Christian quarter on his way back from the Wailing Wall. There was even a little Ethiopian Coptic Christian hole-in-the-wall church that was on his circuit. So this number 3 is important because the 3 major religions out of the Mideast, the mystical end of Islam is the Sufism. The mystical end of Christianity, I don't know what to call it. It's not some of the monastic traditions got there. And within Judaism, it's the Kabbalah. I'm going to read you a little bit more, but not the whole episode. On the 3rd day of Mark's morning protocol, he arrived well before sunrise to find only half a dozen chassidim in their black hats and payas, side curls, shuckling back and forth like drunken penguins wrapped in prayer shawls. Shuckling is just a prayer method of movement back and forth, okay? But they weren't the only ones there that morning. 9 Tibetan monks had arrived and were busy chanting their Tibetan prayers and mantras in guttural, low, somber tones that served to ground and anchor the plaintive Hebrew prayers of the neighboring tribe. The head of the order was standing with his back to the wall, leading the others in their practices. One monk was totally still and silent in a sitting posture. Mark later learned from Ellie, who had heard about it in the week before at the Saturday night soiree at Colette's. Now, Colette was the teacher of what you could call dream Kabbalah. And that's a teaching that has been brought forth in America by one teacher in Toronto, or in New York, and Drinvalo's wife, Claudette. And now Drinvalo is even doing a school of memory based on these teachings of this woman named Colette. And I happened to go to her soirees when the 70s or whenever it was, and I had a girlfriend who was one of her students, so I know Colette's work too. So this is many spiritual teachers, but in a much more lighthearted and less didactic way than most people write about them. Because I'm interested in what a spiritual teacher brings through, but I'm also interested in the character and the character flaws around a spiritual teacher as well. What you could call the gossip level. Ellie said that they must have been sent by Hashem, means the presence or the name, to do some etheric and astral vacuum cleaning. Mark wanted to know whether they were considering similar vigils at the mosque and at Hebron, but Ellie couldn't answer that question. He did find out that the monks were only on day 3 of their vigil at the wall. This was an experience he could share with Sarah over breakfast that day. She was delighted to hear that her partner had returned to the fold, the Jewish fold, and was doing his best to practice Judaism again. She said, sardonically, that in her article for the Inquirer, she was planning to refer to her partner as the Acher, the one who cut the roots and converted from Judaism to Islam. So this is a story about the 4 who entered Pardes, and they all kind of fell by the wayside, except for Rabbi Akiva, who had a direct link. So there's references that probably only Jewish people will know in the book, but that there's an explanation around that other people who don't have that will get it. But it opens up into Buddhism, because one of the students of Johanna was a Buddhist who'd studied with Chogyam Trungpa and Naropa. And it opens up into Sufism, and it opens up into what I would call shopkeeper mysticism in the Mediterranean world.
So this book, since it's newly finished, hasn't got out to a lot of people yet, so you haven't had a lot of feedback. How many people have you given the book to so far, and has anybody fully read the book?
No, I think my friend Ashala, who didn't make it tonight, has fully read it. She helped out in a bit of the copy editing. But recently I was at a Jewish mystical gathering, Fort Collins, and met some of my old Jewish renewal rabbi friends. So it's now out to about 30, 35 people. But I think that book population is going to grow soon. And when there's maybe twice that, or 50 or something, then I'm going to throw a webinar together. And the early people that have bought the book will be invited to be part of the webinar, because there's going to be questions. And a webinar really should be like a 22-section webinar, but I don't know if people have the stamina for that.
That'd be wonderful. That could be why it might be good to have part of these little chapters where you have a little play or a poem in between when you're expressing some of the content in the book.
Yeah, and yes, it's a very large book with many, many teachings in it, but my goal was to make every page alive, funny, joyful, colorful, and I think that's happened. So I'm proud of the beast.
Okay. That's
so
wonderful.
To speak.
That's wonderful. So you feel like a lot of your life's work has had a close and you
Yeah,
feel like...
and look at, I've already figured out the sequel. The sequel will be much simpler. There's one character in the book who's Irish. His name's Jared. He got written out of the novel at chapter 11. He was my best buddy when I was in university years ago. So one of my next adventures is to Ireland for a few months. I have to have a scribe with me to bring through Jared's recollection of his journey with Johanna and what he sees happening in Ireland with the Celtic Tiger thing. And so this allows me to go to Irish pubs every night to listen to all their great jokes and their humor. And so I have some new material to collect from Ireland.
So there's a lot of prophetic information, I know, in this book from a lot of the teachers and a lot of your studies.
Yeah.
Is there a point in the book where it has a prophetic view of what's going to happen in the future in the next 100
Well, that
years?
comes through some of the channelings from Johanna later on. And she was talking about Quetzalcoatl at one point, and she was working with some of the same material that I got from William Irwin Thompson at York University in the 60s about culture heroes being at the border crossing. You know, Moses being at the border crossing between Egyptian and Hebrew culture. Or Yeshua being at the border crossing between the age of Aries and the age of Pisces.
It's amazing. So you're crossing many different wires from different cultures and bringing them into a sort of a song, in a sense.
Yeah, this is not meant to be didactic at all. It's meant to be appetizers. This book is like a big mezza table of appetizers from different cultures, mostly in the Mediterranean world. So it's, it's the buffet table of spiritual appetizers in one big book. And, look, some people might just pick up one chapter and get what they need from it. It's possible.
Well, thank you so much. Would you recommend people go to a website or something to sort of get an idea?
Well, if they want to know more about me, they can go to my main website, which is treeoflifeschool.com, or my travel blog, which is earthmysteriestravel.blogspot.ca, which is the code for Canada. And on treeoflifeschool.com, if they go to the Egypt Gallery, at the very bottom of the Egypt Gallery, after you read, the next tour and the book list and all of that, I am leaving chapter 16 from the Unicorn Messiah there for people to read.
So that's they can download for free?
Yes, they can download that, or they can read it online if they wish. And as far as ordering the book, that's on both sites now, yeah.